My name is Dr. Sam Keene. Who I am isn't important. What is important is that for the last 5 years, I've been part of the NASA team at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena that looks after Voyager 1. For 5 years, I've lived and breathed this old yet unbelievably resilient craft, our emissary into the boundless void. 14.5 billion miles from home. Just think about it. That number still fills me with a sense of reverent awe. A handful of us, engineers and scientists, managed to keep it alive decades after its designed lifespan expired. A true miracle of human engineering, nothing less. Every byte of data received, every command successfully executed, feels like a personal victory. I remember when I first arrived at JPL, a green graduate, and saw the model of Voyager on the huge screen, flying through stylized stars. I couldn't have imagined then that one day I'd be one of those holding the invisible threads that guide it. If you follow science news, you've probably read about the unexplained anomalies that have been plaguing our probe lately. That's the official version, handed down from on high. Unexplained anomalies. Such a convenient, streamlined phrase. The truth is, that's not even half of it. My God, they're not anomalies at all. Blame the slick bureaucrats in their Washington suits, perpetually worried about rocking the boat, about frightening the public. They fear panic more than they fear what's truly behind these anomalies. And what's hiding there is something that chills the blood of even a hardened pragmatist like me. Tonight in the JPL control room was like so many others. A quiet hum of cooling systems, punctuated by the rare click of a keyboard. The monitors cast a ghostly greenish light on our focused faces. We're used to Voyager's quirks. The old man is a senior citizen. A sensor might act up, or the signal might weaken more than usual. But what began 2 weeks ago? That was something else entirely. The tension in the air was thick, almost tangible. Even Anya Sharma, our brilliant signals specialist who normally bubbled with ideas and sarcastic remarks, sat in silence, staring at her monitor, as if trying to see the devil himself in the data. For nights she'd been complaining of nightmares, ice-filled expanses, a pulsating darkness, and the feeling that something immense and unseen was watching her from out there, beyond the edge of our solar system. I'd brushed it off. Exhaustion, stress. Now I realize her intuition, honed by years of working with the faintest whispers from the cosmos, had caught something before the rest of us. We were waiting for the next telemetry packet, and I'm sure every one of us was secretly praying that this time everything would be normal, that this nightmare would finally end. But somewhere deep inside, a cold worm of doubt squirmed, a premonition that normal was gone forever. Voyager was silent for longer than usual, and that silence was more eloquent than any data. It screamed of disaster. When the data finally arrived, the silence in the control room became deafening. The first thing to pop up on Anya's screen were the readings from the Attitude and Articulation Control Subsystem, the AAACS. It's the system responsible for keeping Voyager's antenna pointed precisely at Earth, our only link to this distant wanderer. Anya let out a small, strangled sound, something between a gasp and a sob. I leaned over her shoulder. The numbers on the monitor were clear, unambiguous, and utterly impossible. According to the AACS data, Voyager 1 had stopped. Not slowed down, not deviated from its course, It had simply come to a dead halt. It was hanging motionless in the interstellar void, 14.5 billion miles away. "That's not possible," I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else. My brain refused to process the information. A probe that had been flying for decades at over 35,000 miles per hour can't just stop. It violated every law of physics, everything we understood about the cosmos. "Telemetry error," snapped Wallace Gable, our shift supervisor, a man for whom any failure is first and foremost a breach of protocol. His face, usually a mask of boredom and mild irritation, was now taut with tension. "Check all channels, Sharma. Sam, you run diagnostics on the AACS itself. Must be a faulty sensor." We scrambled to follow his orders, though intuition was already screaming that this was no simple malfunction. Anya's fingers flew across the keyboard, sifting through the data streams. I initiated a full diagnostic of the AACS, then adjacent systems. Everything was clean. No error codes, no warnings. The fault protection software, which should have thrown the probe into safe mode at the first sign of a major failure, was silent. That was the worst part. If something had broken, we would have seen it. But the systems were reporting perfect health while the data remained absurd. "All systems are green, Wallace," Anya reported an hour later, her voice hollow. "Recalibrating the position sensors did nothing. The data is the same. It's stationary." Even the word stationary felt wrong. A spacecraft isn't stationary. It flies, it drifts, it tumbles, but it doesn't just stop. It was unnatural. A heavy silence descended on the room, broken only by the hum of servers and our own ragged breaths. The light from the monitors cast trembling shadows on the walls, and for a moment, I imagined the walls themselves were closing in. The fluorescent lights above my desk began to flicker, one then another, plunging my corner of the room into an unsettling twilight. A small thing, but in the oppressive atmosphere, it amplified the dread. The next day, Director Croft tore into us over a video call. His face, projected on the large screen, was distorted with rage. "Probes don't just stop, Keen. Gable. What in God's name is happening over there? Find the error, damn it. The government wants an explanation, and I'm not about to tell them our multi-billion-dollar project has just frozen in space." A week of hell followed. Endless tests, diagnostics, rechecking every conceivable and inconceivable scenario. We slept in shifts right there in the control room, fueled by cold pizza and coffee that soured our stomachs. Each day brought the same result. All of Voyager's systems were working perfectly, but the probe remained motionless. Disbelief began to give way to despair. At one point, Anya theorized that the probe might have entered some unknown gravitational anomaly, but calculations quickly showed that stopping the craft would require a mass comparable to a small black hole, which we definitely would have detected. Finally, in total desperation, we resorted to a last-ditch effort. We sent a command to fire the trajectory correction thrusters. A short, controlled burn, just to try and nudge it from this dead point. We held our breath, watching the telemetry. The thrusters fired perfectly. The nozzle spat a puff of hydrazine into the void. And nothing. Absolutely nothing. Voyager hadn't moved an inch. It hung there, defying everything we knew. And in its stillness, there was something sinister, as if an unseen titanic hand had simply plucked it from its path and was holding it, toying with us like a cat with a mouse. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just a failure. This was something else. After the failure with the thrusters, the atmosphere at JPL grew even more oppressive. Director Croft called every few hours, his voice growing sharper and more demanding with each call. Wallace Gable was a thundercloud, his usual bureaucratic composure replaced by poorly concealed panic. We had exhausted all standard protocols, all diagnostic procedures. Only one option remained, the most radical one. A full, sequential reboot of all of Voyager's systems. Powering down each module, checking it to the last bit, and then turning it back on. It was a long, painstaking process, stretching over several shifts, and risky for such an old craft, but we saw no other way. We were fumbling in the dark for a light switch, not knowing if it would bring illumination or an even deeper blackness. We worked our way methodically through the list of onboard equipment. Electronics, communication systems, scientific instruments. Each time another indicator on our control panel lit up green, confirming a successful restart, we breathed a sigh of relief. But the relief was fleeting. The core problem, the probe's immobility, remained. I was starting to accept the idea that we were losing it. That Voyager, our tireless wanderer, had finally met its end, encountering something more powerful than human ingenuity. And then, just as we were finishing our checks of the scientific instruments, something happened that made us all jump. Without any command from Earth, without our intervention, an indicator on the control panel suddenly flared to life. The plasma wave instrument, the PWI. It had activated on its own, and, judging by the flood of data pouring onto our monitors, was now transmitting. "What the hell?" Gable barked, his face flushing crimson. "Who activated it? Sharma, was that you?" Anya just shook her head, her eyes glued to the screen where lines of PWI data were scrolling by. "No, I didn't touch it. It was supposed to stay offline until the full diagnostic was complete." A tense silence filled the room. The spontaneous activation of equipment wasn't just a glitch. It was a sign of a critical failure in the command system. Perhaps a short circuit deep within the spacecraft that could have fried anything. Or something else. The sense of impending doom, which had been a vague premonition, now took on a terrifyingly specific shape. The thought of losing Voyager after so many years of success became painfully real. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This was our flagship, our pride, and we were losing it right before our eyes. The data from the PWI could not only be analyzed as graphs and numbers, but also converted into sound. The waves it registers in the interstellar plasma are within the frequency range of human hearing. Normally, the PWI audio is a monotonous, eerie hum, the sound of space itself. the background noise of the interstellar void. Sometimes it's punctuated by bursts caused by solar wind or passage through denser plasma fields. We were all used to this otherworldly soundtrack of our work. Without a word, Anya put on her headphones and patched into the PWI feed. Her expression changed instantly. She frowned, then her eyebrows shot up in surprise, which quickly morphed into clear alarm. She waved a hand for us to listen in. I reached for my own headset. What I heard had nothing in common with the familiar hum. Instead, my ears were filled with a series of sharp, piercing bursts, a chaotic squeal, interspersed with long, wailing tones. They were irregular, at times fading to near silence, then erupting again in a cascade of strange, unsettling signals. It sounded like someone trying to tune a broken radio, catching fragments of distorted, alien broadcasts. The sound produced an irrational, primal fear. It was alien, and it was wrong. "What is that?" I whispered, taking off the headphones. My ears were still ringing from the sharp peaks. Anya stared thoughtfully at the signal's waveform on her monitor. The lines jumped and writhed, forming bizarre, almost organic patterns. "I don't know, Sam. It doesn't match any known cosmic phenomenon. And look here." She pointed to a specific section of the graph. "See these short pulses? They appear right after the bursts of background noise. It's like something is replying to them, or mocking them." I looked closer. It was true. After every natural burst of interstellar plasma, which the PWI registered as a rise in the background level, there followed a series of these strange, sharp signals, like a distorted, malevolent mimicry, as if something out there next to Voyager was listening to the natural sounds of space and trying to imitate them, but doing so crudely, with a kind of sneer. A cold shudder ran down my spine, a harbinger of something terrible. We had encountered something beyond our understanding, and perhaps beyond science itself. We gathered in the small, soundproofed listening room we normally used for analyzing particularly weak or noisy signals. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The same strange, intermittent wail from the PWI now poured continuously from the speakers. Wallace Gable paced the room nervously, his face ashen. Engineers and analysts spoke in hushed tones, proposing one wild theory after another. An unknown form of cosmic radiation. Damage to the PWI sensor itself, creating phantom signals. Or even, whispered, interference from some secret military satellite. But none of these theories explained the eerie, almost intelligent structure of the sound, especially those replies Anya had pointed out. I felt that icy chill trace its path down my spine again and again. This wasn't just noise. There was a sinister logic to it. Anya sat at the main console, her fingers flying over the keyboard, displaying various spectrograms and signal analyses on the large screen. She was paler than usual, with dark circles under her eyes, the result of sleepless nights and constant stress. But in her gaze, fixed on the screen, burned the familiar spark of obsession that always appeared when she faced a truly difficult puzzle. Suddenly she froze, her fingers hovering over the keys. She rewound the recording several times, listening intently to something that had escaped the rest of us. Then she sat bolt upright, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and horror. "My God," she whispered, so quietly I could barely hear it. Then louder, her voice trembling. It can't be. It's Morse code." A dead silence fell over the room, broken only by the continuing wail from the speakers. Gable was the first to react. "Nonsense, Sharma," he barked, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Morse code? How could it be? It's just a chaotic jumble of static." "No, listen." Anya shot to her feet, her face flushed. "Those bursts, the pauses between them, they're not random. Give me a pen and paper." Someone handed her a notepad and a pen. Anya played the recording again, this time at a slower speed. She hunched over the pad, rapidly scribbling dots and dashes, her lips moving silently as she followed the sounds. We all watched her, holding our breath. The room was so quiet, you could have heard a pin drop. The creepy beeps and wails from the speakers now took on a new, ominous meaning. If Anya was right. A few minutes passed that felt like an eternity. Finally, Anya looked up from her notes. Her face was deathly pale, but her eyes shone with a feverish certainty. "Here," she said, her voice shaking so badly the words were barely intelligible. "Paris Paradastra." She took a deep breath and almost shouted. "Paraspera ad astra! Through hardship to the stars!" The room erupted. People jumped to their feet, shouting, talking over each other, asking questions that had no answers. The shock was so profound that for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Paraspera ad astra. Every one of us knew that phrase. Everyone connected in any way with the Voyager program knew it. It was a message, encoded in Morse code and recorded on the golden record, the very one carried by both Voyager probes as a greeting from humanity to any extraterrestrial civilization that might find them. A motivational quote, our handshake extended into the cosmos. And now something or someone out there in the abyss, 14.5 billion miles away, was repeating that message back to us. Not just repeating it, it was playing it through Voyager's own instrument, using plasma waves as its medium. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. This was no accident. This was no interference. This was a reply. The reply we had waited for nearly half a century. And it was utterly terrifying. Not because it was hostile. We didn't know that yet. But because it existed at all. Someone had found our message in a bottle, tossed into the shoreless ocean of space. Someone had deciphered it, and that someone had decided to contact us in this strange, horrifying way. Icy fingers of fear closed around my heart. What did this mean for us, for humanity? We were not alone, and that knowledge, instead of the joy of discovery, brought only a primal, soul-chilling terror. Before we could even recover from the shock of deciphering the Paraspera ad astra message, Voyager delivered a new, even more nightmarish surprise. While an agitated buzz filled the listening room, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and frantic attempts to process what was happening, the plasma wave instrument did not fall silent. The chaotic beeps and wails that we had identified as Morse code suddenly gave way to something else, something far more disturbing. The first to notice was one of the junior technicians, a pale young man named Sato, who had been staring intently at the signal's spectrogram. "Sir, Dr. Keene, you need to hear this," he stammered, pointing at the screen where the wave patterns were beginning to form more complex yet still distorted structures. Anya immediately turned up the volume. New sounds filled the room. At first it was like static and hiss, as if someone were trying to tune a radio to a very distant station. But through the interference, familiar notes began to emerge. First a short musical phrase, warped beyond recognition. Then another. And then, distinctly, though horribly distorted, we heard birdsong. The same birds whose calls had been recorded on the golden record as a sample of Earth's natural sounds. A dead silence fell over the room. All eyes were fixed on the speakers, from which, one by one, fragments from the golden record began to play. We heard distorted passages from Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, played as if on a broken gramophone. Then a few chords of Chuck Berry's Johnny Be Good, stretched and slowed until the rollicking rock and roll song became a funeral dirge. Then came the sound of ocean surf. But it wasn't calming. It was menacing, as if the ocean itself were about to swallow us whole. And a baby's cry. My God, that cry. It was clipped, mechanical, devoid of all human warmth, inspiring not sympathy, but a chill that ran bone deep. The uncanny valley, in audio form. The sounds were recognizable, yet monstrously wrong. It was as if something with no concept of music, of nature, of human emotion, was meticulously trying to copy them based solely on the raw data from the record. This wasn't a broadcast. It was an imitation. Cold, calculated, and soulless. Anya sat with her face in her hands. Wallace Gable seemed to have turned to stone, his jaw slack. I could feel cold sweat trickling down my back. The realization, terrifying in its simplicity, crashed down on all of us. Someone, or something, out there in the immeasurable distance, hadn't just found the golden record. It was listening to it. It was studying us. And now it was playing these recordings for us, using our own probe as its instrument. It was a demonstration of power, and a warning. The horrifying concert reached its crescendo with a voice. The voice of Nick Sagan, son of the great Carl Sagan, who as a child had recorded a simple greeting for the record. Hello from the children of planet Earth. In the original, it sounded touching and innocent. But what we heard now made the hair on my arm stand up. The voice was stretched, wavering, and broken, as if spoken by a being with a completely different vocal apparatus. The intonations were warped beyond recognition. The phrase, intended as a symbol of peace and friendship, sounded in this alien rendition like a mockery, a taunt, or a blood-curdling threat. Hello from the children of planet Earth. It scraped from the speakers. and in that distorted greeting was an abyss of cold and otherness. I felt like we were being watched. Not just watched, but dissected. Studied like an entomologist studies a captured insect. Every sound, every note, every phrase from the golden record was a part of us, now being turned inside out and shown back to us in a hideously twisted form. They were letting us know, we see you, we hear you, we know you, and you are helpless. The room was plunged into a silence broken only by the quiet hum of equipment and our own ragged breathing. We had sent a message of peace into the cosmos. But what if the one who received it wasn't looking for peace? The eerie concert of distorted sounds from the golden record ended as abruptly as it had begun. For several agonizing seconds, an absolute silence descended on the listening room, save for the frantic beating of our own hearts. We looked at each other, not knowing what to expect next. It felt as if time itself had frozen, awaiting the next act of this horrifying play. It wasn't a long wait. The first alarm came from an operator monitoring the Attitude and Articulation Control Subsystem, AACS. "Movement!" he cried, his voice cracking into a high pitch. "AACS data, it's going crazy!" We rushed to the main monitors. What we saw plunged us into a new, deeper level of shock. The screens displaying Voyager's telemetry had literally exploded with data. Numbers changed with kaleidoscopic speed, graphs shot vertically off the charts, and indicators flashed an alarming red. Voyager 1, which had been hanging motionless in the interstellar void for weeks, was moving again. But this was not the movement we had so desperately tried to achieve. It was not the result of its own thrusters. The data on its position and, most terrifyingly, its velocity, which flooded our systems, was not just incredible. It was physically impossible for any human-made object. The speed was increasing exponentially, shattering every conceivable limit. Tens of thousands of miles per hour, then hundreds of thousands, then millions. The numbers were so absurd, my mind refused to comprehend them. I stared, mesmerized, as an icy terror paralyzed me. This wasn't the telemetry of a spacecraft. This was something else. Alien. Incomprehensible. "Trajectory!" yelled Anya, her face a white mask. She was working furiously at her terminal, trying to process the insane data stream. "Get me a trajectory plot!" A few tense seconds passed as the computers calculated the course of this impossible flight. Then a line appeared on the main screen, tracing Voyager's path through a stylized map of the solar system. The line was straight as an arrow, and it was pointing. It was pointing directly at Earth. Chaos erupted in the JPL control room. People were shouting, running from one monitor to another. Someone was trying to contact management. The phone on Wallace Gable's desk was ringing off the hook. It was Director Croft, his voice distorted with rage and fear, audible even through the closed office door. Gable himself was sitting with his head in his hands, rocking back and forth, muttering something unintelligible. All his bureaucratic bravado had vanished in an instant, leaving only a broken, terrified man. And I just stood there, staring at that damned line on the screen. And suddenly, it all clicked into place. The epiphany was like a lightning strike, searing and merciless. The golden record. It wasn't just a collection of sounds and images. It wasn't just humanity's calling card. It was a map. On it were diagrams showing our location in the galaxy relative to 14 known pulsars. On it was a diagram of our solar system, indicating the flight path from the third planet. On it were schematics of the human body, of DNA, of our biochemistry. In our naivety and hubris, we hadn't just sent a greeting into space. We had sent a detailed instruction manual on who we are and where to find us. We had thrown open the door and shouted into the darkness, "We're here!" And someone, or something, had heard. And now it was coming. Voyager wasn't just moving, it was being dragged, pulled at an inhuman velocity, as if tethered by an invisible cable to something immense, powerful, and utterly alien. It was no longer our messenger. It was a trophy, or worse, a guide, a beacon leading an uninvited guest straight to our doorstep. If you could see it now, out there in the cosmic abyss, its faint light reflecting the distant sun wouldn't look like a spark of hope. It would look like the predatory, unblinking eye of something staring down its prey, staring at us. A week has passed since Voyager 1 began its insane return journey. A week filled with chilling horror, enforced secrecy, and a feeling of utter helplessness. All information about the event was immediately classified at the highest level. The few of us who witnessed it were forced to sign non-disclosure agreements so severe that the mere thought of violating them was terrifying. JPL became a fortress under siege, cut off from the outside world by a wall of silence. We worked around the clock, tracking Voyager's approach, though work is hardly the right word. We were more like spectators at the reading of our own death sentence. Each new telemetry packet confirmed our worst fears. The velocity wasn't dropping. The course remained unchanged. It was coming for us, relentlessly closing the billions of miles between us. Meanwhile, the world went on with its ordinary life. People rushed to their jobs, laughed, loved, argued, completely unaware of the threat hurtling towards them from the depths of space. The news showed the latest political debates, sports highlights, soda commercials. The contrast between the mundane outside world and our knowledge of the approaching nightmare was almost unbearable. Sometimes I wanted to run out into the street and scream, to warn everyone. But who would believe me? They'd think I was a madman. I often thought about what it was. What force was pulling our probe back? And why? Was it the simple curiosity of a highly advanced civilization, eager to meet the authors of such an intriguing message? Or was it something more sinister? Hostility? Hunger? Or motives so alien to human comprehension that we can't even begin to imagine them? On the golden record, we depicted a man and a woman extending their hands in a gesture of greeting. But what if to them that gesture meant something entirely different? An invitation to the dinner table, perhaps, with us as the main course. Anya barely slept. Her nightmares had intensified. Now she didn't just dream of a pulsating darkness, but of a vast, indistinct shadow eclipsing the stars, with Voyager flying straight into its maw. She tried to find some flaw in the data, some loophole that might give us hope, but it was useless. Wallace Gable had retreated into himself, a shadow of his former self. Director Croft no longer yelled. His rare appearances in the control room were marked by an air of grim resignation. The golden record was our message of peace and goodwill, an act of faith in a rational and friendly universe. But what if the universe isn't what we imagined? What if, in its bottomless depths, there are entities for whom our concepts of good and evil are meaningless? We sent a miracle of engineering into space, a symbol of our reach for the stars, and now that miracle is coming back, guided by something unimaginable, bringing with it an unknown, more terrifying than any known threat. The countdown has begun, and the silence of space we had listened to for so long was about to be broken. Very, very soon.